my mom and dad are like, we have lined up a job for you so that you can be a
Good evening, everyone. We'll be getting started in about 5 minutes. Just wanted to remind you all to please put your microphones on mute unless you're asking a question, and then we can unmute you. Thank you so much for your participation, and we're looking forward to a wonderful conversation. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the inaugural conversation with Britt of 2022-2023 season. We're looking forward to what Britt has to say regarding the Timberwolves, and he's always insightful and just a wealth of knowledge. We are honored to have him. My name's Harry Colbert Jr. I'm the managing editor of MinnPost. And if you're not already a member of MinnPost and don't receive our newsletters, please go to our website, minnpost.com, and click the join button so you can become a member and receive our newsletters and stay up to date on everything that we have to offer. With that being said, I'm going to get out of the way so that we can have this wonderful and robust conversation with Britt. Britt, good evening.
Good evening. For those of you who have been on these things before, the drill usually is if you see the little reactions button and you can raise your hand on the side if you have a question, I'll call on you in essentially the order that it happens. And I find that the Q&A format is the best way to do on this. I don't need to do an intro or anything. You guys usually have some great questions that stimulate the conversation immediately. So with that said, if anybody's got their hand up, let me know. I see Josh Boersma right away. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, I guess twofold. One, just in general, I was curious if you'd seen the reports that Walker Kessler is looking fantastic in Utah training camp and preseason. And then two, the main question is about Leandro Bolmero. Was it more just that he couldn't shoot, or there are other issues? And then when did the Wolves kind of get the sense that this might not work out like they thought it would, or did they think there was still an asset worth developing when they traded him?
All right, I'll take the last one first. I'm not a Bolmero fan. I thought that he reminded me of a puppy dog. Really, really immature in terms of his makeup, a little bit too enthusiastic to the point where I'm not sure he was able to settle down on the court. He had great defensive capabilities, good size, good range, wide, probably good for deflections, but easy to bait into overreacting. The shot obviously is the biggest thing wrong with his game, but and I would say his passing to some extent was what we saw was a little bit overrated concerning what the hype was to him. So I'm not a Leandro guy to talk to about that. As far as Walker Kessler goes, Walker Kessler would be competing with Nate Knight and Naz Reid as the third center on the roster if they'd somehow managed to keep him instead of getting Gobert. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's probably not going to be as good as either Gobert or Cat. So I'm not really sure why we'd keep him around in the first place. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just curious if he's looking great, but I guess that was crux of it is, would he have been worth keeping around? Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else with their hand up? Let me find it here. Don't see any hands up. Wow, that's a difference.
I mean, I know a way to stimulate the conversation. Just ask about Jalen Noel. Will he be on the team? Will he get an extension or not, or will he trade him? Because the defense is an issue, but he's got the offense.
Yeah, when it comes to Jalen Noel, without a doubt, his upside is far superior to Bolmero's, and I would argue that for where he was taken in the second round, he was a steal. He's got a really friendly contract. He's been really coachable. When Finch demanded more of him defensively, he dedicated himself to that part of the game. I think what impressed me most of all when I just looked over the numbers before I did that interview with Chris Finch at the, I guess in September, was that he shot 39.4% from 3-point range, which obviously is really good, better than anybody else on the perimeter for the Wolves this year, last season. And yet he's known primarily as a bucket getter, a guy who can get off the bounce, a lot of good mid-range shots on people who are trying to take away the three or the rim. He's instant offense. And from what I've seen him in thus far in the 3 exhibition games we've had, I think he is certainly worth getting, a mid-level $6-7 million deal for multiple seasons if in fact things pan out, I would imagine, the way they should. Questions?
There are two hands raised. Katie,
Oh, sorry. I'm for some reason I'm not seeing them. Okay, yeah, Katie, how you doing?
Hey, Britt. First of all, thank you, MinnPost and Britt, for putting this on. We're really lucky to have just beat writers who are willing to talk to fans and be transparent with us all the time. So thank you guys. But my question is that this year the Wolves are probably going to get more attention from the national media. Not necessarily who are you looking forward to hearing about their Wolves coverage, but what national writers do you tend to read or look to for their coverage?
Well, I don't
Just
think
in
it's
general.
I can tell you right off the bat that Rob Mahoney has been in town working on a Wolves piece, and he's with the Ringer. He's a fantastic writer. Before that was with SI, sportsillustrated.com. Before that was on and off writer for the New York Times. Just a really smart guy. He was one of the guys that pointed out when we were just talking when he was in town that don't dismiss Austin Rivers and Bryn Forbes immediately out of that bottom of the rotation, that they manage to always find themselves working themselves into minutes for quality teams, which I looked up, a really smart observation. It's in fact true that Forbes and Rivers get between 17 and 20 minutes every season coming into a team pretty much where they are now on the fringe of a roster. They're both really smart vets. They have very different skill sets, but are both pretty valuable. And it made me realize that it was a really smart move by Tim Connolly to get them for basically a combined $5 million a year, especially if you consider that Malik Beasley is making like triple that money on his own. And, dollar for dollar, Bryn Forbes is a lot more valuable than Malik Beasley, a very similar skill set profile, and just somebody who's also hit a lot more big shots in big games. So Rob Mahoney is definitely one. I would say Zach Lowe, obviously. There are all, Dan Devine, who's now moved over to Yahoo Sports, is somebody else I really like. And then, The Athletic has just a bevy of great writers. And then, I'd be remiss, this already, Katie, but, beyond me and John Krasinski and Dane Moore, Jace Frederick, there's just a lot of really smart writers. Chris Hine. When I started covering the Wolves, the quality of the coverage on this team was really threadbare, quite frankly. And now the way it gets covered, the depth and intelligence is phenomenal. I find myself learning from my peers here in this market every day. And I just think, and that translates into other markets as well. I think NBA writing, we're in a golden age of writing, podcasting, whatever you want to call it. There are no longer that many strictly analytics people or strictly eye test people. I think that kind of divisiveness and silliness has gone by the wayside. As smart people doing both have shown how silly it is to lean on one or the other exclusively. So hope that answers your question. But yeah, I think there's good times ahead. I think this team is going to be covered a lot more thoroughly. And I, for one, am really looking forward to whatever Rob comes up with. He had great access here. He talked to almost everybody, and he's a really good writer. So watch the Ringer for what comes up for him next.
Awesome. Thanks, Britt.
Sure. Reggie.
Hey, Brett, how are you?
Good.
Good. So there hasn't been a whole lot to see yet in the preseason, but I'm wondering this most recent game against the Clippers with mostly rotational players playing at least until the very end. They gave up like 117 points or something like that. What is there anything you noticed about their defensive style? With Cat back at the center and no Rudy, was it back to mostly the high wall stuff? I mean, that seems like a big difference from the game prior when Rudy was in there in the defensive.
Oh, yeah.
Metrics show
I
that they
mean-
did really well with him.
And a good question, thanks. I do think they ran a lot of high wall. They also ran some drop coverage, especially in the second half. Cat was really slow on rotations, regardless of which kind of defense it was. Obviously, the rotations are more crucial in the drop coverage. But when he was in high wall, getting out to the corner, they burned him. And some of this is even neither high wall nor drop. It was more when they were in transition, sometimes getting into the half court really quickly. And the Wolves were trying to find people sometimes. But that whole first quarter, Cat was getting burned from outside. Cat's man was burning him inside and outside. And I think some of that was just, he hadn't played. You had an illness for a while. But it was concerning. And I remain a pretty strong skeptic about Cat's ability to cover space as a power forward. I will also point out that the Clippers are uniquely suited to burn the Wolves in that two big lineup because they have so many guys who can both put the ball on the floor, are over 6'7", and can shoot from outside. Kawhi and Paul George leading that off, but there are others. And then they've also got some capable bigs. Zubac had a pretty good game, had good minutes when he was in there. So at the end of the day, let's face it, it's going to come down to what Chris Finch and the roster can figure out to best maximize both the offense and the defense of Cat and Rudy on the court together. And Cat and Rudy haven't been on the court together. I'm sure they're, working like a son of a bitch in practice, trying to figure that out in the limited time they have. And I strongly suspect they'll play together in the Wolves' only lone preseason game on Friday against Brooklyn. And certainly, according to Finch, he just came out and said they'll be in the lineup together for the opener. But we don't know. And I'm not sure they know yet. When I spoke to Finch last month, he said, rather than try to invent a wheel or invent a scenario that we don't know what we're up against, we're going to see what other teams throw at us and make adjustments. They are putting in drop coverage, and they are putting in high wall, and they are putting in subtle variations on that, or what you might call a hybrid. They ran, actually, what they looked like, they ran a little zone last night. I don't know if the night before last. And they have done some switching, but it's mostly been drop with or high wall, depending on whether Rudy's in the game or not. Again, Cat and Rudy, they've got a lot, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in this. And it's a 4 and 5 year contract situation. So they will do everything possible to make it work. They don't know how it will work yet. The upside is this offense should just be phenomenal. We've been seeing, in preseason, the depth of the offense. You got 9th and 10th men coming off the, court, flinging. Bryn Forbes is your 10th man right now, and he's shooting the daylights out of it. Jaden McDaniels looks like his offensive game has really grown. So they're going to be, I think they're going to be a top 5 offense. Utah never had below a top 10 defense when Rudy was in Utah, and the defenders that he surrounded himself with in Utah were not as good as the collective 4 that will be in the starting lineup for the Wolves. And I argue that what Finch did with the defense last year, I have faith that he'll make it work. But the end of the day, right now, as we're talking before their 4th preseason game, it's totally an unknown, and we have no data points for how Cat and Rudy will work together. Rob Hillman.
Hello.
Hey,
Do you want a question on pace of play or prevalence of ISO?
hit me with both.
So the pace of play, and Dane's on because years ago there was a focus on pace of play, but I saw Cat and D'Lo don't sprint really well, and I thought we should slow down. And now there's the take foul change, which thank God, because the action looks a lot better. You can see players almost taking a foul, and we've got a guy Rudy, who can clean up the boards so that we can leak out, and Ant, who if he has the ball in the open court, can't be stopped. And so I wonder if now pace of play might be an advantage because of this take foul change, and we've got defensive rebounding. And I love that we're still playing a little bit of high wall because it might create turnovers to get the ball out in the open court. So that's my question on pace of play. Because
Okay, let me answer that one first, and then I'll
Yeah.
get to your second one. First of all, pace of play is it's almost as bad as, well, I'm sure there are other bad stats. It's a bad stat because a lot of it, if your offense turns the ball over a lot, you play really fast. You know why? Because you've had a very short possession and that other team immediately has another possession. If you're a really good offensive rebounding team, your pace of play theoretically is slow because you've retained the possession. Pace of play is essentially possessions, okay? And so if you have few possessions, you have a slow pace of play. Actually, Utah and Quinn Snyder is a really good example of that. They're usually, although they did increase their pace of play in the standings or the order as the years went by, when Quinn Snyder first came, they were among the bottom 2 or 3 teams every year in pace of play.
Yeah.
And it's because he's a fast half court. He likes to pass the ball around a lot in the half court. And because they get a lot of offensive rebounds because Rudy Gobert is on the team. And they, so anyway, it is not a reliable stat. All that said, the Wolves, I think I'm right, led the NBA in pace of play last year. It is kind of remarkable. If they didn't lead it, they were right up in the top 2 or 3. And it's because Chris Finch really believes in maximizing that time that most coaches kind of take for granted, that time when you grab the rebound and then you get into your offense. He wants to challenge that on defense, which is why another reason he hits the offensive glass so hard is because he wants those guys to stay back and challenge people in the backcourt. In other words, initiate their defense almost immediately before the other team can even get into dribbling the ball up the court. And by the same token, whenever anybody gets the rebound on the Wolves, according to Jim Peterson's broadcast the other night this year, which I believe because it really is kind of a Finchism anyway, whoever gets the ball, pretty much if they can dribble at all, should turn around and start dribbling or get rid of the ball. And the goal is to get over the half court line within 4 seconds. Now, does that mean they're going to be Steve Nash and a cloud of dust? No, not necessarily. But they're going to be getting into their half court offense with at least 2 or 3 people minimum that quickly. And if possible, to your point, if they have a guy like Ant who is be able to sprint down the court, and you have a guy like Rudy who, hoovers the defensive glass, you're going to be able to get a lot of transition opportunities. So I think the Timberwolves will play fast under Finch at all times. You're absolutely right. The D'Lo is a weird fit for that. The opposite of J-Mac, by the way, who is a perfect fit for it. But on the other hand, there's a lot of other reasons why D'Lo should be the starter over J-Mac. So I'm not quibbling with that. I do think that at the end of the day, the Wolves will always be a fast-paced team under Finch for the reasons I've listed, and I think that's a really good idea. You are on the right track when it comes to the idea of maximizing Ant in transition. I would argue also that I could really see McDaniels being a really good pull-up 3 guy if he's not one of those ones hitting the glass. And I also think Jalen Noel is a bucket when he's out there. Forbes would be great for pull-up 3s. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. What's the other question?
The offense action has, like, let's say the half court offense has looked so good most of the time and under Finch. And once in a while, if a player takes 2 or 3 dribbles and is not, it looks so odd. And it's typically Ant or Cat maybe trying to do a one-on-one.
Yeah, don't forget
just-
D'Lo.
Or D'Lo. And I just wonder if we have to have some element of that, because in postseason teams will switch. They will understand the sets that are, and so we need to have some ISO, even though now, because again, the offense looks so good that only 15% of the time we get these ISO plays that look so odd. But I catch myself saying, but we might need that, because that's what the best players in the league do when they win the biggest games.
Yeah, and again, I mean, you're asking it as a question to be improved, and I think it can be slightly improved, but I would point out, as with pace, the Wolves are already doing it, even though it looks odd. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a ball movement guy. Finch's first principles on offense are move without the ball and move the ball. But you do see him allowing Ant to, dribble the air out of the basketball, and D'Lo and Cat to some extent. You're right about that. But when I looked it up, I mean, their ISO plays, percentage of their offense, they're in the top 10. Percentage of their points per play on that, they're in the top 3. So they are using ISO more than the NBA norm, and their efficiency with it is much more than the NBA norm. And as Ant continues to improve, and it's not quite ISO because Gobert will be setting screens enough, but I think you will try to get isolation circumstances, quick, really quick screens, curl around screens, or dribble handoffs. So I think you're going to see what amounts to ISO basketball a surprising amount of time. But again, I'm just hoping that the kind of ISO we see is the kind that really maximizes the efficiency. My eye test says that whenever Ant just dribbles and dribbles and dribbles, his shooting percentage is a lot lower than if he dribbles once or twice and then takes a sidestep and launches. Same with D'Lo.
Yeah.
I just don't like the cat and mouse. It may be a bias, and the numbers, like I said, are good. So it may be that my eye test is biasing me against what the analytics say is a good thing.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Galen.
Hey, thanks, Britt. So correct me if I'm wrong, but in the history of our entire franchise, we've never had a true inside lob threat. The only lob threats we've ever had are probably wings. How important do you think it'll be to the early success of the team and having a top 10 offense to really get that chemistry with Rudy on the lobs? D'Lo obviously had the chemistry with Jared Allen in Brooklyn, but a lot of the rest of the guys on our team haven't played with a player like that, and I think it could take a while to understand when a guy's going to dive to the rim, to hit that right touch. And so Ant himself, I think, said that he's never played with a guy like that who can do something like that. So how long do you think it'll be before the rest of the guys kind of figure that out, and how important to the offense will that particular skill become?
Well, I mean, it's crazy. Did I see Rudy Gobert try a lob to Jaden McDaniels the other night? We don't want lobs just for lob's sake. I think that there are people who can throw lobs and there are people who can catch them and put them down, but it doesn't work as amazing amount of the time as you might expect them to, because it's not always that easy a play. Gobert is arguably the best in the NBA at it. If he isn't, he's right up there. And D'Lo is one of the best at doing it. So I think already you have that. And if teams are really consciously looking to stop that, then that magnetizes people on D'Lo and Gobert. And I think when you have Cat and Ant on the floor, that's nothing but gravy for the Wolves offense. If you're magnetizing people away from what I would say are their 2 most explosive scorers on your team, then even the threat of that is great. The fact that they can make good on that threat is even better. do I want a bunch of people doing it? Do I want a lot of, do I want Jade McDaniels catching a lot of lobs? He caught a really nice one from D'Lo the other night. And I think he's capable of it. But again, I don't need too much of it. If it's there, take it. But to make it as much a part of your package as, getting out in transition or pick and roll or cat, above the break threes or, ant baseline drives. There are a lot of ways this incredible Wolves offense, at least I think it'll be incredible, will be explosive without necessarily relying more than we need to on lobs.
That makes sense. I just looking at Utah, I mean, having guys like Conley and Mitchell and Ingles who could all throw lobs to Rudy and just get so many easy buckets that way, and wondering how much like that will become the linchpin of our offense as well, or as you indicate, because of all the extra skills that we've got on the team, that we may not need to be as dependent or try to focus on that in our sets so much.
Yeah, I do trust Finch in knowing that if something is going to work regularly, or if even establishing the threat of that prominently is going to really help the rest of the offense, that he will lean into that. It makes sense that if you have a really, people who are really good at that skill, and Gobert very much is, that's one thing. Ingles and Donovan Mitchell were both really good offensive threats. Neither one of them is a cat. And I would argue once, Ant ramps up, that I just feel like the Wolves have enough firepower to not, I think one of the reasons Utah leaned on Gobert to that extent is because it was one of the better plays in their arsenal. And while it might be one of the better plays in the Wolves arsenal, I think the Wolves arsenal will be larger. I'm going to take a question here off in the chat because Joe Johnson says, my mic isn't working, so I'll leave a question here. Seems like the team has made an effort to put Nas out there in a lot of different looks as a 4 and a 5 as a roll man, spacing and hanging out in the dunker spot. You think they're workshopping ways to get him minutes on the roster or possibly showcasing him as a trade candidate? I'm glad I read that question because I think they're showcasing him. Now, this comes from somebody who has not been in Naz Reid's corner very often. And I wouldn't call myself a Naz Reid hater because I really do respect what he's done with what he had coming in. But I think at the end of the day, he's fool's gold. I think he can have marvelous games. We can all remember some really sparkling offensive games, and we can remember some great individual blocks. And I do think he's played well. But I would just offer that in his 20-point, 11-rebound game the other night, the Wolves' offensive rating when he was on the floor was 87.3. So, those you can always, make up number. Those aren't take to the bank numbers, really small sample size. All I'm saying is that when it mattered last year in the playoffs, Nas was abominably bad. And as a third string center, I'm not sure that's what you want. I have more faith in Nate Knight. I think it's not a great choice. I don't think that's a high bar between either one of them, but I have liked what Nate Knight has done in this preseason better than Nas, even though Nas is getting more attention. And again, I'll freely admit that maybe that's just my bias talking, but I don't think so. Mark Snyder.
Hi, Brett. I'm gonna change things up a little bit, and we're supposed to focus on the Wolves, but I wonder how much you have gotten to look at some of the other teams in the West. And I ask that because we all think the Timberwolves are going to be a lot better and they'll have a better record. But I mean, other teams have gotten better too. And so from that perspective, where do you see them in the standings?
Well, that's a good question. That'll probably be a part of my season preview that'll come out a couple of days or the day of the home opener next week. I think it's next week. But I can say what teams I think will be better. Obviously the Lakers will be better. They had everything go wrong last year. Obviously the Clippers will be much better. They had a lot of injuries, and they have Norman Powell for an entire season. I think New Orleans will be much better, even though I'm not sure how I feel about Zion. His displacement factor on a roster may make some really good players not play as well, but it's really hard to think they'll be worse than they were without him last year. I don't worse than that team was. And they were really coming on. I thought they were an interesting team. I really like Willie Green as a coach. Jamal Murray is back with Denver, and he's an all-star type guy. Clearly 1A, 1B situation with Jokic, who's a two-time MVP. He complements Jokic really well. So I would think they'll be better. And then Phoenix remains to be seen. Golden State remains to be seen. On the other hand, both of those teams were numerous games better than the Timberwolves last year. So they have room to slip if they need to. You figure that Golden State will be around at the end. And you've got to think that with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and even unhappy and strangely treated Aiden and some other folks that they have Bridges. I think Phoenix will still be very good. I think the Wolves will be in the mix. A 1 or 2 seed would really surprise me. A 7 or 8 seed probably would really surprise me. All things, injuries aside or whatever. So, I think they'll wind up somewhere between 3 and 6, and that'll depend on a lot of factors. But I think it's going to be a really fun season. So thanks for asking. Who's next?
Thanks, Brett.
Any more questions?
We've got Reggie, and Katie has a hand up.
Oh, they have second name. Katie, you want another question?
Yeah, I do, but it looks like there's a couple in the chat who haven't asked questions yet. So if you want to, I don't know
Okay.
what you prefer, but
And Steve as well.
Okay, let's go with I'll get to John's in a minute, but let's hit Steve first. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Say, I'm wondering, I agree with you that they aren't going to be a 1 or 2 seed, but getting ahead of myself, where are the weaknesses that they would have to shore up to get to that level? Is it just the younger players like Ant and Jaden maturing more as they get into their prime? Does that get us there when hopefully Kat and Rudy are still good, or where is it that we would have to advance?
You mean to get to a 1 or 2 seed?
Yes.
What needs to happen?
Yes.
I think more time together will give us a lot better answer to that question. Also, while the Wolves have been elevated in the conversation, they're elevated to the place of they're an interesting team with enough talent that they could become a genuine competitor. But that gets said about 2 or 3 teams emerging almost every season. And if you go back and look, the batting average isn't all that high. And some of that is just really top end star/superstar leadership means a lot. Really, really good coaching means a lot. Team unity means a lot. Synergy of skill sets mean a lot. And last but certainly not least, luck means a lot. And that means, who gets hurt when, what happens at a certain time, at a certain place. KD, steps on the 3-point line instead of getting behind it and they lose a game. To get to the level we're talking about where 1 or 2 minor things going wrong could cost them a trip to the finals or something, I think you need to have Kat and Gobert genuinely want to help each other be the best that they can be, perhaps at their own expense. that's easier said than done. That's the lip service that always gets paid, you know. I'm gonna help, you know, how would you think you and Rudy are gonna play together? How do you think you and Kat are gonna play together? Well, you know, that's a stupid question because they're obviously gonna give you the canned answer. We don't know what the real answer is, but we know that if the Wolves are going to be a legitimate competitor, then Kat has to really want Rudy to be in the spotlight and happy. And Rudy has to really want Kat to be in the spotlight and happy. And if one of them is getting a little bit more attention at that time for that, you know, for that reason, they have to be able to know that that's a really good thing. Now, I was encouraged by the way Kat has treated the ascendance of Ant. I really do think he genuinely feels like Ant's success is his success and the team's success. And I think some of that is that he feels like he can be a big brother to Ant in that respect, or at least regard himself that way. When it comes to Kat and Rudy, they've competed to be the third or fourth or second best center in the NBA for a number of years now and have cost each other all NBA team designations. So they're competitors and now they're teammates. And they also have very different skill sets. Kat thinks he's a better defender than he is. I suspect Rudy thinks he's a better offensive player than he is. It would be great if they could figure out how to make that true through their own strong side skill. And I think that will be crucial, quite frankly, to how well this team does. And his ascendance, I think, is probably the biggest X factor. I think if Ant becomes a Paul George type or more, if he becomes a top 8 to 10 NBA player rather than a top 20 NBA player, then I think they're going to be scary good. Jaden McDaniels, from what I've seen of him this year, you know, again, these are all things that Jaden McDaniels is somebody that I legitimately felt like the Wolves should have punted 2 more first-round picks to keep him around. Chris Finch has compared him famously to Scottie Pippen. There are signs of the things he does, even like in the last few preseason games, that really quicken the pulse and make you think this is a phenomenal player in the making. But none of this has happened yet. And at the end of the day, Kat and Rudy are both kind of looked on poorly by the rest of the NBA because they haven't won jack shit. In fact, they have, according to the narrative of the NBA, which I don't necessarily agree with in either case, neither one has performed well in the playoffs. Those are big things, and players care about that a lot more than they're willing to let on to people. And how they respond to that is another way that the Wolves' ceiling is going to be raised or lowered. And then, you know, I guess I would argue that who's going to be a key missing ingredient? Who's going to be a guy? Every team has a guy that comes along who you expect a C+ or B- performance from, and he gives you a solid B+, A- performance through the entire season. One of my favorite examples in the 03-04 Wolves season, Fred Hoiberg played out of his mind, and it was his best season by miles and miles, and he was fantastic. And because Wally Szczerbiak was hurt a lot of that season, it was crucial that he played that way. Trenton Hassel came out of nowhere and was a lockdown defender until they disallowed hand checking. Guys who you don't expect to be really good, becoming really good is that other factor that goes into it. So that's a long-winded answer, but a lot of things have to happen for a team to be legitimately good contender for a long period of time. John's iPhone to everyone says, what will the final roster be? Any unexpected players get let go? I don't know. You know, I mean, you have the starters, you know, Kat Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Ant, and D'Lo. Off the bench, you got to think Kyle Anderson is your sixth man. Torian Prince is going to be in your top 8. Jordan McLaughlin is going to be your backup point guard. And Jade Noel, I think, is proven that, he belongs regularly in the rotation. But then you're already leaving out as your 9th and 10th men, Brett Forbes and Austin Rivers, who I just mentioned, have found a way to usually worm their way into even good lineups and perform in a way that makes them hard to remove. So then you come down to, 12 through 15. Well, Nas and Nate Knight and the 2 rookies, Wendell Moore and Josh Minot, there's your 15. Do I think that that's the 15 they'll have, with the two-way guys being Lawson and Pascal? That means DJ Dozier is gone. And that means Ellaby is gone. I think Ellaby is gone. To be honest with you, did I say DJ Dozier? I think he was a running back for the Vikings. PJ Dozier. But anyway, no, to be honest with you, I don't think there will be any surprising cuts. But I do think that there's a very good chance, if not before the opener, by February, Nas Reed will probably get traded. And I think it's because I could see how he would be valuable to a team that needs his kind of instant offense and who can cover his blemishes better than perhaps this Wolves roster can. Reggie, you got a second question? Reggie may be gone.
I do. No, I do.
Oh, okay.
So, D'Lo's making 30 million. Noel's making like 2. I see those 2 guys as real similar. Their games are a little different, but their effectiveness is the same. They're both offensive oriented, limited defensively. Do you see a world where D'Lo's let go because Ant's and Jaden's extension kind of squeezes him out, and Jalen maybe plays point guard with splitting that duty with Ant a little bit in the future?
I don't see it. I don't see it because I think that the gap between what D'Lo sees the floor like and is able to pass compared to what Noel sees the floor like and is able to pass is a wide chasm. I am not a D'Lo guy, as most people who follow me know. But that said, I appreciate the fact that he is a ridiculously good passer. He puts finesse on the ball. Like what they say about good quarterbacks, he can throw a softball or a hard ball, depending on what the situation calls for. He's a great pocket passer. He's somebody who is really good at the surprise skip pass when he's driving in a little bit and feinting like he's going to do something, one of his dipsy doodles, and instead zips a skip pass to the weak side corner or slot. Noel can't do any of that. Noel is not a bad passer, but I don't think he's a rely on him as a point guard passer. Plus, I think that the Wolves, John Hollinger for The Athletic wrote about the Wolves season preview today. And, he mentioned that the Wolves have kind of trapped themselves in a situation where they're going to be so close to being over the cap that they really have no choice but to extend D'Lo, because they're not going to be able to get somebody of his quality under the cap constraints the way they have it rigged. And he also points out that they could have substituted, if Utah would go along with this, I don't know if they would have, but they could have substituted the Beasley Beverly combo, taken them out and included D'Lo instead. Since he's an expiring contract, and that probably would have suited Utah, who are trying to tear down and rebuild. So there's somebody in that front office, or maybe multiple people in that front office, who like D'Lo and think that he's really somebody who can work. And perhaps they knew already that, well, they did know because it was part of that deal, that to have Gobert come along, D'Lo is a perfect complement. So while I was writing and firmly believed that D'Lo was not long for this team, as recently as early in the summer. I think the subsequent events, specifically the Gobert trade, but also the way the Wolves have managed their assets, that they've almost forced themselves to keep D'Lo, and they have forced themselves to keep D'Lo in a situation where he has the potential to be very good. Now, if D'Lo has a subpar season or plays the way, especially defense, the way he did in the second half of last season, then that gamble on keeping D'Lo under those circumstances, I don't think will pan out. And I think that will be a hard thing. I don't think they'll be able to get value for him. They won't just get rid of him. There'll be somebody who can offer some kind of value for him, but it won't be a good enough value. So I think what is likely to happen is that we see how D'Lo plays. If D'Lo plays really well, that they figure out a way to keep him. I don't think it'll be $30 million, but maybe it will be. And if it is, again, that's the price you pay for continuing to keep consistency on a roster that you think is going to be an NBA contender. We got about another 14 minutes. I'm happy to take any other questions. Am I missing anybody? Rob, you have another question?
Yeah. We've gone through a roller coaster of 3-point mix. Like the Rubio-led teams didn't shoot many. Then Garrison came in, we're shooting 45 or 50. Now things seem really casual, like comfortable. Any player can shoot anywhere when they get a good shot. It seems like, I love it. It seems like players are empowered to take the shot they want to. And it feels like a little bit like Phoenix in their offense, and they have a lot of mid-range with Devin Booker and Chris Paul. And they won 64 games last year, and they had COVID, I think, in the playoffs, which caused some problems. And also they have a lot more older players with Chris Paul. But I wonder, what's your guess on how many 3-point shots we'll see on average? I know there's been, you and Dane have mentioned like Cat needs to maybe shoot 10 a game. But the way I'm watching the preseason, there's a lot of mid-range, and it looks good.
First of all, I think the Wolves attempted more threes than anybody in the NBA last year. So that's pretty phenomenal. If you just imagine 5 years ago, remember when Tom Thibodeau kept saying, we're going to shoot threes, and anybody who dared try some found themselves on the bench pretty quickly. So specifically Nemanja Bjelica was always somebody who supposedly was encouraged to shoot threes until he tried them. But I digress. What was remarkable about last year's Wolves is that, and I've said this before, I know, but none of the starting perimeter players had even a league average true shooting percentage. And a lot of that came from the fact that both D'Lo and Ant were subpar 3-point shooters, and yet jacked up a lot. And Pat Bev had a terrible true shooting percentage. John J-Mac, bad. So the fact that Bryn Forbes is on the roster, the fact that Austin Rivers, who discovered a corner three in his arsenal and developed it in the last couple of years, are positives. The fact that you have a career, call it rounded up to 40%, career 40% shooter on volume in Karl Anthony Towns, who now just by the, change of position from the 5 to the 4, will be shooting more threes, I think, and from different parts of the court. They have the opportunity to be more efficient from deep without shooting as many. I think Gobert getting the ball, he is a career 0 for 11 0 for 5 real, 0 for 6 on heaves, but 0 for 11 in his career on 3-point shots. The fact that he will be getting, 12 to 15 shots a game just based on pick and rolls and putbacks diminishes your chances of, more 3-point attempts. I've been encouraged by the fact that Ant seems to be going to the rim a little bit more than, relying on his 3, which is the mix I prefer for him. And also, you've got a really important player in Kyle Anderson, who's going to get, I think, a lot of minutes, who is an abysmal shooter. I mean, I hope he's better than he's been the last 3 preseason games, because they're, the other night they gave him the shot, they ushered him in, and he was clanking all the time. Finch thinks that he's smart enough to put the ball on the deck and create shots for others if that happens. But unless his shot dramatically improves, I can't imagine him being on the floor with Gobert and D'Lo effectively. I think that should be Taurean Prince, who, by the way, is having a really good preseason from deep and shot really well from outside in the second half of last season. So it's kind of like what I was saying about lobs. It's a viable and legitimate part of their arsenal. In this case, I think it can be dialed back a little. I would be comfortable with the Wolves being top 7 or 8 in threes attempted rather than top 1 or 2. They did finish 7th in offensive efficiency, so a lot of missed threes, didn't obscure the fact that they shot well from inside and also got to the line a lot and shot well from the free throw line, which is another part of true shooting percentage. So, but, I was a little worried about 3-point shooting, losing Beasley. I've been really encouraged by Forbes. I've been encouraged by McDaniels, another guy who was really pretty bad on threes his second season. He was much better his rookie year. He looks better. He's a lot more confident. I think one of the great things about McDaniels is he's a lot more confident now going to the rim. And I think when that happens, when you're not do or die on catch and shoot threes, you shoot those catch and shoot threes with more confidence, because if you're missing, you can always get to the rim and freelance. So I expect bigger things out of him this season as well. Let me see. I got this, John, 2 unrelated. Behind closed doors, what would the Wolves organization deem a successful season? And 2, just wondering if you can riff on what Kyle Anderson will mean to this year's team. So I kind of answered one of them a little bit, but behind closed doors, I think the Wolves organization thinks home court advantage in the playoffs would be a successful season. I would too. I think that a top 4 seed is a reasonable expectation, but still a step forward in a beefed up Western Conference. So I guess that's where I would put it, as a benchmark of if they finish 5th and lose in the first round, I think that behind closed doors, they will say, we wanted better, but we'll get better next year or whatever. But I don't think they would regard that as a successful season. And as for what Kyle Anderson will mean, the guy is one of those guys. Good defenders do this. KG did it. Pat Bev did it last season, although he's losing a step. But guys who know when to freelance to plug a hole, when to communicate that a hole needs to be plugged by somebody who's closer to the action, and somebody who can not only see the floor like D'Lo does, but can see the floor while they're reacting to their own thing. It's almost like learning how to drive and being able to look in front of you, but also be really aware of what's going on in your rear view and side mirrors. Having that like omni vision. Kyle Anderson has all of that. What Finch really likes about him is, and it was obvious, I mean, the very first preseason game, Kyle Anderson was kind of running the point the first half dozen plays. Finch really likes the idea of him being a on-ball guy in certain circumstances. But he's a great, versatile defender who makes the defense better on the court, even if it doesn't look like he's making all the plays, because when he is plugging a gap, he's doing it with the prescience of somebody who makes it look like that's the way the defense is supposed to be running. He's just a smart, capable defender who's got good size, can guard a lot of people. But he's got to improve his shot. That ruined Josh Okogie here. Finch, as much as he loves Kyle Anderson and will give him a huge leash, Kyle's got to be able to shoot better than like 30% from the floor. And 3 preseason games, who knows? But right now it doesn't look great for that. Last question I have here on the side from James Kinhara. Assuming Garza doesn't make the cut, do you think he gets signed elsewhere? Would we send him to Iowa? I think given the fact that big lugs are not really highly coveted, that he would probably go to Iowa and quite likely, or if not Iowa, some other G League team. But I would also expect that he will play somewhere in the NBA this year once injuries start to mount. I just expect him to be one of those guys that when Basketball Reference comes out at the end of the year, you'll see him playing 17 games for 2 different franchises. And those clusters of games are weeks apart. I don't think he's bad, but I think he's obviously slow. He's smart. He has decent range, I guess. But he's the 5th best center on this roster. So he will not be in the top 15. And I don't think he's somebody that another team will say, hey, we need to sign this guy to a contract or even a 2-way. But I think they will sign him to a 15-day in late January when they have 2 bigs out. All right, 7:57. I'm going to go into my little spiel. First of all, thanks everybody. I love doing this stuff. I love to think out loud, pretty much is what these questions allow me to do. And this also gives me a chance to give thanks to MinnPost. When the Athletic said that they weren't going to use freelancers anymore and pulled the rug out from underneath me in October of last year, 6 weeks before the season started, or something, maybe 3 weeks or whatever it was, pretty soon before the season was starting. MinnPost, Andy Poots, the editor at the time, contacted me and said, come write for us again, and he offered a figure, and it was more money than I was getting paid at the Athletic. And all I can say is I have certain ways of writing when I turn in my stuff, how long it almost always is, how much I want to expect a fast turnaround. I'm not an easy person to work with in certain ways. And when I find people that allow me to work the way I work, I try to, pay them back. And one of the ways that you can help me pay them back, when I was thinking about going off on my own, because I didn't know what other options I had, there were a lot of people on Twitter who said, start a Patreon, I'll give you X amount a month, or whatever. And at the end of the season, when I was going to rent a car to go to Memphis, some people said, hey, we'll pay your way. I have these unused flight miles and everything. The generosity of my readers always blows me away. And so I'd like to put 2 and 2 together whenever possible, at the same time leaving it totally up to you that if you regard what I do as worth a Patreon, use that money for a contribution to MinnPost. I think that you'll also really enjoy, if you get into the site it's got a lot of really good things in it. I write arts for it as well as sports, an arts feature a month. And their political coverage, I think, is really good. And they're what an old-fashioned community newspaper run by smart people used to look like and looks like again, only with the advantage of all this technology and the pace to be able to cover a rapidly changing community. So that's my pitch. Thanks for coming. If you see clear to give money to MinnPost, I appreciate it and thank you. And I'll be doing a few more of these as the season goes on. I'll also be doing a mailbag every now and then, just so I can keep in contact with you folks. And as always, if you have any questions or you want to hit me up about anything, please do via my Twitter feed if you want, at Britt Robson, or through MinnPost. And thanks for coming again.
And thank you, Britt, and go Wolves.
That's right. Go Wolves. See you later.